30, 40 minutes. But anyway, such is the times. The name of tonight's talk is the 7 things that everybody wants. And in order to start talking about that, I would like to tell you a story. When I was living in Israel, in Jerusalem, I attended a yeshiva, place for Jewish learning, called Aish. And it was right across from the Western Wall. And amongst the many great things about it was, from time to time, actually very often, but visitors would stop in because we had a great view of the Western Wall, and they would check out the facility, which was very cool and very modern. And from time to time, they would strike up conversations with, the locals, the guys who were in the yeshiva and by and large engaged in this Judaic learning. And once in a while, really interesting conversations would ensue. And I remember I was studying by myself, and I had my book, and I'm looking at it, and right next to me was a Rasputin, lank-bearded rabbi, and across from him was a quite secular Israeli soldier, and they were having a conversation. And it was a really interesting conversation. I have to admit, I was eavesdropping a little bit. And eventually, it got a little bit more heated, and the rabbi said to the soldier, what exactly is it that you want from life? Why are you here? What are you looking for? And the soldier said, to tell you the truth, Rabbi, I'm basically looking for 3 things. I'm looking for sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There was a little pause. The rabbi said, that's great, because that's exactly what I'm looking to give you. So soldier's a little taken aback, it says, okay, well, what do you have in mind, Rabbi? And he asked them the question, well, what is it that you like about drugs? To which the soldier thought about it for a few minutes. What do I like about it? Well, it's this feeling of being beyond yourself and being united with something higher. The rabbi said, it sounds to me like you're looking for transcendence and unity. And he said, I never really thought about it like that. I suppose you're right. That's interesting. And he said, what is it that you like about rock and roll? And he said, it's, the power of the crowd and everybody rallying around something. Again, the rabbi said, it sounds like you're looking for power, sort of a kind of power, and you're looking for unity again. And he said, okay. And he said, so if I could show you how to get those things without some of the costs that go along with some of what you're doing, would you be interested? And the guy said, yeah. And so the conversation kept going. And I learned a lot from those few minutes and thought about it. I'm still talking about it now, 20-something years later. And I started asking people the question, what is the most spiritual experience that you've ever had? And I started writing them down. And I asked them in class settings and personal settings. And, I started doing a little collection of adjectives. And what I discovered was that there were patterns. And over, people were saying the same kinds of things, that they were, when they identified as having a spiritual experience, there were words that went along with it. And even, although some people said, of course, that they didn't have a spiritual experience ever, to which I would ask them, what was the happiest experience you ever had? And that would be something close. And I boiled down all the adjectives that I got to 7. It does not mean that there aren't 1 or 2 more or 1 or 2 less. There's nothing scientific or definitive about this list. It's just the list that I discovered. And those 7 things are three of them taken from an Elvis Costello song, which is called Peace, Love, and Understanding. Those are the first three. And I have an acronym for the last four, which is JHUTS: Joy, Harmony, Unity, and Transcendence. And in my subjective opinion, that's what everybody is rooting around for 24/7, all the time. All decisions are focused on whether or not you will increase your quotient of one of these things. So, what do I mean by that? Take, for instance, a football game. Why do people attend football games? Yes, there is something interesting about the skill of the players, and the march up the field, and the two sort of armies pitted against each other, and you're seeing whose skill is greater and who has a better strategy, and there's definitely something to that. But I was never a gigantic football fan. Speaking of gigantic things, I went to see the Giants a long time ago, New York Giants. And, I was passively interested and watching the game. And it was one of those games where our team, the Giants, were down by a little bit with short time left on the clock. And I remember very well that something happened, the ball was handed off, and the guy breaks one tackle and then another one. And it's one of those situations where the running back is headed straight up the field with other guys trailing behind him, and the crowd is on its feet. I find myself standing on the armrests of my chair, like caught up in this whole thing, screaming for this guy that I didn't know and didn't really care about. And when he broke through into the end zone and this eruption from the crowd occurred, I was like in a euphoric state, and this literally happened. I look at the stranger next to me, and we just embrace, and in that moment, I loved that guy because we were bonded over this goal. And although I didn't make much of it at the time, although I thought it was kind of fun, I realized that having this common goal actually generated love between me and the people that were there, as short-lived and somewhat artificial as it may have been. There was also something real about it. There was, and then I realized that that's why people go to football games, is they are looking to be part of something much bigger than themselves. I am a Giants fan, and being in Giant fandom has a whole host of special privileges. You get to belong to something that's important, something that's beyond just you and me. There's merch that goes along with it, and following stats and players and management, and you get to be part of a world, and even though I don't personally think that world is extremely valuable to be part of, and perhaps there are other worlds that are more beneficial, it's still good because it promotes this other thing, which is unity, transcendence, could be love. And that's really what the fans and probably the players are really looking for. It's just totally arbitrary to carry a football from here to here, or to go across this imaginary line that's just made up. And it doesn't, the game itself doesn't have any actual value. It's just whatever we've ascribed to it. And therefore, what I surmise is that in situations like these, there is always a goal beneath the goal. It's not the game that we care about, it's the trappings of the game. It's what's rooted underneath it. That's what we're ultimately looking for, and that's what we're looking for in the vast majority of our experiences. So that's important to know. Why? Because when you know this, you can focus on getting the most distilled version of these experiences that you can. If you know you're looking for love, you're not going to play around, in things that aren't going to provide you with the most undiluted experience of it. You're going to go right for the mother lode. You're going to know how to avoid the pitfalls of searching for something in the wrong place. Added to that, and this is also part of a very well-known Aish type of talk, which is called the 5 levels of pleasure. These are all pleasures, right? And people are always looking for pleasure. This just happens to be a high level of pleasure. There are counterfeit versions of each of the 7 things that everybody wants. And one famous example from the 5 levels of pleasure is love. Everybody wants it. Everybody needs it. It's one of the ultimate driving forces of life and humanity. And yet, people settle for counterfeit versions of it. The most famous of which I would label lust, which is the belief that you are getting love. It's possible to convince yourself that there's love involved here, when really it's just a more physical manifestation of it that is most likely going to be short-lived and not pay the dividends of actual love. And therefore will ultimately prove to be unsatisfying. And all these things the soul needs. And when it doesn't get them, it's frustrated and despondent, and we don't understand how to get along with people properly when we don't understand that they too are looking for these exact same things. So when, for instance, a husband and wife are not providing these experiences within the context of a marriage, it's going to lead to conflict. It's going to lead to pain. Most of the fights that couples have can probably be boiled down to, you are not giving me, for instance, understanding, which I find to be a very interesting one. How many times have couples said to each other, you don't understand, you're not listening, you don't understand me, right? Why is it so important to be understood? Artists want to be understood. Musicians want to be understood. Go check out a talk that Jodie Foster gave on the occasion of her 50th birthday, a remarkable public talk that she gave, where she basically boils down her entire career and thinking forward into her future. She says, I want to be understood deeply. That's it. That's why she acts. That's why everyone does what they do. One of the reasons, one of the 7 reasons. But who cares? Who cares if you're understood? Why does that matter? How does it help you to thrive in this world, to be understood, so someone gets you? Well, what happens if they don't get you? Why can't you still get what you want out of existence? And that's one of the fascinating things about this entire concept, is that these 7 things that everybody wants and needs and pursues all the time are not a biological or evolutionary necessity. You can eat perfectly well without having love. You can have shelter and reproduce and everything without having peace, without having transcendence. You don't need it. You can, it's not like mosquitoes aren't, pining away for understanding. What does this mosquito understand me? And this mosquito it's just there isn't part of that. I don't know what love or understanding or even joy salmon have, and they do great. They're in the water, they're reproducing. If that's what it's about, and we've been told, that's part of what life is about, is the struggle to survive. The struggle to survive for what? Life becomes meaningless without having these fundamental properties, these fundamental experiences, which do not contribute to your physical well-being or your evolutionary success. Yes, I acknowledge that there are evolutionary biologists and others who would suggest that somehow, yes, it does. That would be a fascinating, longer topic of conversation. I dispute it. I don't see how it's possible. Don't believe it. And therefore, I'm forced to conclude that these experiences are spiritual in nature and not physical. So that when you have an experience of love or transcendence by definition is beyond yourself, you are actually experiencing what I'll call a higher plane of existence. You are, for lack of a better term, tapping in to the spiritual reality, to a non-physical, metaphysical transcendence aspect of reality. It's not made up, it's not fantasy, it is part of reality, but one that is not measured by scientific instruments. Maybe someday it will be. I think I quoted maybe last time Noam Chomsky, who when asked what the definition of metaphysical was, basically gave an answer that I love, which is, all things that we understand are called physical, and all things that we are yet to understand are called metaphysical. Someday, metaphysical things will be simply called physical things, and we'll have a greater understanding of them, which I think is the direction that humanity and science is going in. That was last time's conversation. Okay, but now, the reason why these 7 things are so powerful, the reason that they are the ultimate drive and destination for humanity is because we come from that spiritual world, at least from a Judaic perspective, and actually from most religious systems. A human being is a combination of a non-physical component, sometimes called a soul, and a physical component, a body. Those things are in conflict. You're getting pulled one way by one and another way by the other, and our decision-making, whether to think more spiritually, have more spiritual experiences, pulls us in one direction, and if we have more bodily focus, we're going to become more corporeal, more bodily, and our level of spiritual interface will become lower, denying us the type of pleasure that comes from these higher levels of consciousness. So what does all this have to do with Kabbalah? So let me see if I can share my screen with you for one moment. Hope I can. There's that. That doesn't help anything. There we go. Okay. So this chart is known in Kabbalah as the Tree of Life. It's a additionally fascinating reason why it's called the Tree of Life. Perhaps you're familiar with the original description of the Tree of Life from the Garden of Eden. I would suggest, Kabbalah would suggest, that there is a direct connection between this and that, which is some food for thought for you. As you see, there are 10 circles here, or spheres. These are known as the 10 sphirot. And in Kabbalistic thinking, these are the 10 energy structures that undergird the entire universe. Yes, which is a grand claim. Much of Judaism is built off of this structure, even though most people don't know about it. And in order to explain that, let me quickly explain that there are 3 higher spherotes and 7 lower. It's usually broken up into a system like that. And I should also mention that sometimes there is one in the middle. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Sometimes there is one here, which is called dot. And so ultimately, sometimes it's considered that there are 11 spherotes, which is a fascinating thing by itself, for another thing for another time. But anyway, when Keter here is turned on, Keter means crown, this one, which is not being shown currently, is active, and so too vice versa. But be that as it may, Chachma, I'm sorry if I couldn't find one with English, but Chachma, the word is Chachma, which means wisdom, Bina, which means discernment, and Dat, which is not present here, comprise the upper three generally. And that is also an acronym for Chabad, which is where that organization takes its name from the upper three intellectual sphirot. And then there are these lower seven, which are known as the emotional sphirot or sphirot of action. So I mentioned that there's an upper three and a lower seven. There's many examples of this. For instance, in the book of Exodus, there are 7 plagues which are visited upon Egypt, and then there's a break. The Torah portion ends, and then the next Torah portion has the remaining and most intense upper 3 plagues. Right this moment, we are in a period of time known as the 7 weeks of consolation, which leads right up into Rosh Hashanah. Of course, preceding the 7 weeks of consolation is the 3 weeks, which is a negative period of time between 2 fast days. And so there you have it again. You've got the 3 separated from the 7. On the Seder plates, if you look carefully, you'll notice that there are 6 items on the top of the Seder plates. For various reasons, the Seder plate itself is considered 7. And of course, separated from those 7 things is the 3 matzot. 3 matzahs, there you have it again, 7, 3, and the list really goes on and on and on. And so my point is that Judaism is really replete with this concept. It's a fundamental Kabbalistic concept. Okay, so in thinking about the 7 things that everybody wants, I discovered a connection between these 7 things and between these 7 lower energy structures of spheres. And although this does not exist as far as I know, in any type of Kabbalistic book or any Judaic work, so maybe I'm the originator of it, therefore I can't vouch for it, but I do think it's interesting, and still it is a good teaching tool to understand these concepts. So I'm going to go ahead and assign one of these 7 things to one of the 7 lower spherotes, and hopefully we will come away with some understanding of both. Starting down here, this sphere is called Chesed, and it means loving kindness, most closely associated with the patriarch Abraham. It means to be expansive, to give, to be concerned for others, and therefore it would make sense to me to assign that with love. Love and Chesed go hand in hand. That makes perfect sense. Okay, so moving across this way, the opposites of Chesed is Gevura, which means strength or discipline. And I associate that with, sometimes, by the way, Gevura is associated with this sphere that's just above it, which is known as Bina. All the spheroids on this column are related, the ones on this column are related, and the ones in the middle are related as well. So there's a connection between Gevura's strength and Bina, understanding or discernment. So therefore, Gevura to me is associated with understanding. So here we have love, understanding, and now right in the middle, balancing between these 2 forces is something called Tiferet, and Tiferet means beauty or splendor, and I associate that with one of the 7 things, which is harmony. It makes perfect sense, balanced perfectly in the middle of everything. See how it's harmoniously blending all of these spheres around it. So love, understanding, harmony. Moving down here, Netzach means victory or eternality. And to be eternal, right? To go beyond your boundaries or to experience transcendence. So I associate Netzach with the transcendental, going beyond your capabilities. And there's all kinds of things that could be said about this. It's fascinating, Netzach. And then moving over again in this direction, Hod, associated with Aaron, the high priest. It's associated with humility. Aaron was known as a Rodef Shalom, somebody who pursued peace and made peace between people. That's what he was about. And therefore, what could be more perfect than peace, right? So now we've covered peace, love, understanding, harmony, transcendence, leaving us with two more. This one, this is called Yesod, and it's associated with the patriarch Joseph, Jacob's son. Joseph was somebody who saved his family. He prepared the way in Egypt and saved the entire world, actually. And I associate him with unity. Yesod means foundation. It's unifying all of these sefirot that came before and sort of preparing it for its final destination. But if it was any sphere that was the unifier, it would be this one, Yesod. And so unity makes perfect sense to me here. And then finally, the end of the entire structure and process here brings us down into Malchut. Malchut means kingship. It also is the moment of implementation. It's the execution of the concept, of the idea, of all the waiting and processing that's come before. And therefore, what could be more joyous than when the plan is finally put into action? And therefore, I associate Malchut with joy. And that is the summation of the 7 things that everybody wants. I find them to be present Kabbalistically in all of these structures, these very famous ideas of which, as I mentioned, Judaism is literally built off of. And I actually encourage people to take the time to understand these concepts, because it is so fundamental, so part and parcel of what Judaism is about. And I often find I'm surprised that there's not more interest in seeing how these things are to be found in normative Judaism. It's so interesting and so compelling. Suffice it to say, there are many great books, many great websites, to pursue your Kabbalistic understanding. Yes, there are also websites that are not so good. You could be led astray a little bit and find information that's not 100% accurate, 100% conveyed well. But if you want to email me, find my email. My email is ajacobs@aish.com. You want to email me, I'll put you in the right direction. And those are my thoughts on the 7 things that everybody wants. I think it's very important to understand them and to try to ask yourself, what's my motivation when I do the things that I do, when I make the decisions that I make? Why am I doing it? What's the real reason deep down that I want these things to happen? And I think if you scratch the surface a little bit, you'll discover that one of these concepts is in action. And the more you come to understand them, the more you can utilize them well, the happier you'll be, the happier you can make people around you. And truthfully, the more harmonious the world would be if we were all living these a little bit better. Hope you've enjoyed exploring it. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a wonderful week. And thank you so much for listening.